Well, no one is willing to look at the reasons why couples are in fact separating, or the brokenness in the self that leads one to cheat. There are those who are being accused of being the reason that our health care is so high. But through the great medical miracles of the world, we've had the grace and the joy of being able to live longer. There are those who are blamed for the problems in the city, and those people who are blamed for the problem in the government. It's always those people. Around the world, Kuwait, Slovakia, Palestine, most of northern Africa, almost all of West Africa, the Middle East, and large chunks of Asia, everyone has someone else to blame for what's happening. And so often, and in our story, that fear and hatred turns to rules and eventual genocide. When the powers have turned against someone, even walking down the street creates fear in that person. And when life is filled with fear, sometimes life isn't considered worth living. Food is something that the powers have the ability to give, and so Pharaoh enslaved the children of Israel and cut their food supply. And across the country, men, women, and children suffer from malnutrition within food deserts in our own cities and famine in East Africa. Because those who are considered less worthy receive less of the goods of the world. And the world's powers tell you you're less. When the world says you're not worthy, that you're not smart, that you're not going to be anything, when the world tells a group of people that they deserve to be in slavery, to be oppressed, and that the oppression that they are put into, eventually they start to believe it. It might be a hopelessness that overtook the children of Israel. And while Pharaoh feared the sons of Israel, probably for their strength and the ability to uprise, it was the women he should have been watching out for. Shiphrah and Puah lived in hope. They didn't buy into the story that they and their people were not worthy of the life they were given. They fought for life in works of civil disobedience grounded in hope. Grounded in something that they knew about their God. Because clearly God had not abandoned the children of Israel. They were not forgotten. They were not left to be destroyed because they knew God. And they knew that God was a God of love and life. That God cares for those who are oppressed. That God cared for them and had not left them. And that little bit of hope, that little bit of trust, that little bit of not believing the lie that they were not good enough, it changed everything. Theirs isn't a story of hopelessness, but one that says something will happen. And until then, we're going to do what we can. See, as midwives, their whole job was to care for the mother and the child, and that's what they did. Even when it countered the orders of Pharaoh, of the powers. They didn't know that their actions were going to lead to their leaving Egypt, being freed from their slavery. They didn't know that one of the boys that they saved would lead them to the land for which their forefathers had been promised. But they knew there was something more than being people enslaved. They knew there was something more that they could do. It was their role, it was their job, and they did it faithfully to the women they served and to their God. They strove for freedom. They waited for a deliverer. And I'm sure it's what they waited for in Egypt. It's what they waited for in Babylon years later. It's what they waited for in Israel under the Roman rule. And one thing, the faithful actions of love and service by these two women, followed by the three other women, Moses' mother and sister and Pharaoh's daughter, set into motion things that would bring freedom. One thing. They gave all of themselves because that's all they could do. It's all they had to offer. Because sitting and waiting quietly for God to show up wasn't going to make their world a better place. It wasn't going to end their oppression, and it certainly wasn't going to save any lives. It wasn't going to bring justice. They changed the world. It's a really loosely defined butterfly effect, that little events, little things affect everything else around it. They make something else possible. Little moments, decisions, acts of love. One thing changes the course of everything else in the world. I found an example. You can't always tell where the efforts begin that make a big difference. For instance, Norman Borlaug developed the high-yield, disease-resistant corn and wheat, was being credited for saving 2 billion lives from famine. Or maybe it should be Henry Wallace, that one-term vice president who created an office in New Mexico to develop hybrid seed for arid climates, that hired Borlaug to run it. Or maybe we should credit George Washington Carver, who took young Henry Wallace on long walks and instilled a love of plants in him. Or maybe we should credit Moses and Susan Carter, who adopted the orphan George as their son. Or maybe we should. We could go on, and you get the idea, but every small act changed and shaped to save those 2 million lives, and every small act changed and shaped Moses and brought freedom to the people. And friends, you too can change the world. This week, you will change the world. This week, you might set something into motion. We are called to be co-creators in God's world around us. And this week is a good week to decide we can change the world. Because we might, in fact, in the next 6 days, finish raising that money for the well, and there might be a child in that community. Not just Moses, there might be another child in that community who lives because of what this community has done. Who might grow up and live, who might be a voice for his community, for his country. Who might go to school, he might be a doctor or a teacher and go back and help raise another child. I know that $17,000 was incredibly intimidating and intense, but it brings life, and it set things into motion. Imagine the other amazing things that you can do. We may never actually see all of those results, but we believe and we trust that God knows them and uses them, and that the things have been set into motion. But maybe this week, this month, there's something else. It's not just that God has done enough.